Welcome to the recorded version of Sprout Lab's webinar on enabling learning ecosystems. First of all, I'll do a bit of a quick introduction to myself and to Sprout Labs. So I'm Robin Pettard, the founder of Sprout Labs. Sprout Labs essentially works with building digital learning platforms that enable you and your team to author, deliver, and measure high-impact digital learning systems. The three main systems we work with are Glasshouse, Tatara, and a new system we're working on at the moment called Yield. We'll talk a little bit more about these platforms in a few moments. In actual fact, in some ways, the focus of this particular webinar is on what these platforms mean in terms of learning. If Sprout Labs is new to you, you might not realize we produce a lot of other content other than the webinars as well. There's a Learning Web Working podcast, which works in a series-based format where we release a topic and thematical series, which means we also have gaps, by the way. That's part of what that means as well. We have the blog, ebooks, and then the recordings of the past webinars. In July this year, we ran a virtual conference with 35 people participate in it over 14 hours. In actual fact, most of those people were people who'd been on the podcast again. 2019, we're planning on running that again. In this particular session, we explored what it means to work with open and flexible technologies, what XAPI means in terms of being data rich, how to enable social learning using on-the-job checklists to measure performance, a little bit on learning campaigns, and also a bit on cloud platforms. This is a bit different to a lot of the other sessions. In actual fact, if you're trying to listen to this webinar, it's not going to be a great experience because what I'm going to do is not read out what's actually on a lot of the slides. I'm going to actually narrate what's actually on the slides and that you read what's on the slides, because we probably will distribute this particular content in different ways as well. The other thing that's really different about this particular webinar is it's a lot more geared to really exploring what our platforms are as well. So, first of all, what is an ecosystem? Ecosystem is for me a series of interactive systems that work together, and by them working together means that they build something that's greater than the parts. In terms of learning, this also means that it's sort of a spot where people have choice about what they do and how they work with it, and multiple bits work together in different ways for different people to be able to achieve outcomes. The other thing I really love about the ecosystem model is it can actually look really different for different people and different organizations. One model that we've put together is this model you can see here. The whole idea is at the center, you've got a series of pathways that are really guiding people to how they will need to learn while working. Quite often these can just be things like what competency frameworks, and sitting there saying these are what the goals are, this is the expected behavior. And there needs to be places to allow learning to be in the flow of work, and I'll actually talk about a few of those possibilities. There needs to be spaces and times and ways that people can learn from each other. Then in the ecosystem model, because essentially the focus becomes on the flow, learning on the flow of work, hothouses need to exist. So essentially, in some ways, what's our traditional training becomes places for people to practice new skills. I think of this as sort of like a set of incubators and places to grow things, to move into a new way. Now, one of the frustrations quite often in organizations is the only way to access an organization's know-how and expertise is training. So the foundations of the learning ecosystem is actually making sure that you have your knowledge actually explicitly expressed and written down and communicated as maybe performance support systems, so that people don't have to do training to be able to get that know-how. And this is the sort of learning design side of a learning ecosystem. The other side of it is the actual technologies to support this sort of approach of multiple things coming together. So in actual fact, Sprout Labs came to the idea of learning ecosystems from both a point of view of learning design, which is what I've just been talking about, and then learning technologies as well. So quite often in other industries, say marketing is a really good example of this, that people don't sort of choose one platform and sit there and go, this is the only platform we work with. They work with a mixture of platforms. Sometimes they could talk about a stack, a learning stack approach, and bring different things together and then integrate them together. What you can see on screen at the moment is an example of what a learning ecosystem could look like in terms of the fact that it still has a learning management system, but that possibly doesn't always become the most important thing. The learning portal becomes a really strong thing, and then a learning record store becomes really the core of where your data is held. But the whole idea is the fact that using something like the new XAPI means that you can actually bring together all these things into an integrated whole. We'll explore a little bit more about this later, and I'll actually depack some of the jargon I possibly just used in that session, in that as well. So even things like XAPI, I will talk about a little bit more. So the three platforms we work with. So Glasshouse is a learning design platform. It basically allows you to be able to build learning content in a cloud-based format. It means you can, as an organization, manage your content in a different way, collaborate with people in a different way. And also because it's 100% built for the web and not coming from a spot of being so much PowerPoint based, it means it's in a really nice spot for being able to work across devices. Then we have Tatara Learn and Tatara Social for delivering. These are open and flexible and affordable platforms that really give you a different type of experience and a different type of flexibility when it comes to learning management. Yield is our measurement platform. So essentially, when we work with these technologies, we include a learning record store. And what we felt was missing from that was actually a system to be able to really develop insights from that data in a more sophisticated way. So what we're doing is working with Yield. It's a machine learning engine for XAPI data. That means that it can make recommendations to learners based on recommendations and suggestions of learning experiences based on what they've done in the past, and then also make predictions about how people are going as well. I actually don't talk much about Yield in this particular webinar, and we will be doing more about what's happening with that in early 2019. The rest of the webinar recording is organised around the scenario of Wattle Hill, which is the local council. Now, I chose the local council because essentially I was really wrestling with how could I actually find an organisation that might actually be in a spot where their problems could actually appeal to lots of different people. And one of the interesting things with local councils is they just have such a diversity of sets of problems. Now, the other thing is that with the Wattle Hill scenario that I'm talking through, is they're actually already at a spot where they're sophisticated. They're actually quite mature in their digital learning. So they're not in a spot where they started. They're actually a spot where they're sort of quite along their way. We've got three characters: Zoe, line manager; Sarah, learning lead; and Michael, the digital learning lead. So we're going to look at the learning technologies and the learning ecosystem through these three different lenses. So Zoe's day started. Now on the bottom here you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, I've got what bit of the ecosystem is happening. In the middle, at the bottom, I'm highlighting the learning strategy, and then it's actually at the bottom right-hand side. We're showing what is the actual platform that's being used and what's the feature of that. So Zoe's day started with a notification on her phone. It's coming back through from Glasshouse. It's really a follow-up activity to help with learning transfer after a safety leadership program that she's been doing. And essentially, so the whole experience becomes a sort of blended mix of face-to-face and spaced micro learning. It means also at the beginning of the day that learning is really put at the forefront of her mind. That she's being reminded of the actual fact that that is actually doing new things and becoming better at her job is actually important. Um, it's hinted at, talked about this a little bit beforehand when Glasshouse being really sort of designed for with web technologies in mind. It means it's all responsive, and it means it can work on a mobile phone, which then means Zoe can actually be in a spot where she actually can access this while she's on commuting. To map this out in a visual way, and if this Sprout Labs is new to you, you might not have seen these 70-20-10 maps. And in actual fact, this work around the ecosystems comes from working with the 70-20-10 model and then how to actually build different types of experiences with that. So here we have a map of this idea that the program might start with 360 feedback and benchmarking of what's happening beforehand using the Tatara Learn appraisal tool. Then moving into face-to-face sessions. Then it's a community in a platform called Tatara Social. And then this micro-learning experience that's happening over a period of time. And then 360 feedback at the end to help measure how it's all gone. For Zoe, each one of these space learning activities is coming back onto a portal. Now, portals are an interesting word. The way we've started to use them at Sprout Labs is to refer to something that's not actually a learning management system. It's something that's more built like a normal website. That it's actually more learner-centered in its approach. It's a bit different to a learning experience platform as well. Learning experience platforms have sort of grown into a spot where they also have a content library, whereas a portal gives sort of a different set of flexibility to be able to build something that's like a website that people can curate material into, have dashboards, and the experience is more like sort of browsing a website. So rather than being enrolled in a course, you've got a series of things you can access. Now, you can actually use a learning management system to build these types of experiences, and it's also partly what the learning experience platforms are trying to do as well. Now, one of the things is, in terms of a learning portal, you might sit there and go, well, how do you record what's happening on that? This is where this notion of a learning record store comes into play. And in actual fact, one reason why we're interested in learning portals and working with learning portals is Glasshouse just makes a really great platform for building learning portals. So a little bit about learning record stores. The learning record store is basically where the data from the XAPI standard and system goes. And essentially, it's a new type of learning analytics system that's not just all geared to a learning management system. Essentially, it records data in a really flexible way of an actor, someone, experience something, a verb, we're doing something. So, say Sally experienced hang gliding, and the result was such and such. So that becomes a really powerful, flexible way of recording things, and not just within a learning management system. It's sort of outside of there, as well as it just becomes a really nice way of logging things in a learning management system as well, to give a different type of flexibility around recording and reporting. So what does a learning portal look like? So this is an example of a learning experience that's built around being more portal-like and more like a website that's free to navigate. So people actually go into each one of these modules, and when they're ready to start, then they actually press the start button rather than them always being allocated through the LMS. So what actually is happening with this sort of thing is that, and this approach is, you might actually have multiple different sources of data coming through. So essentially, the learning management system, quite often now in this sort of model, becomes more compliance focused and about managing, say, face-to-face learning. In our ecosystems, that data is all sent to the Moodle log store using a version of the Moodle log store that we've actually built ourselves. And then the the learning portal becomes a little bit more different because that becomes a lot more focused on what people's growth is, what they want to do, what they can browse to do as well. As that's going into the learning record store, you can get visualizations out of the learning record store we use, which is Learning Locker, that looks like this. So essentially what we're seeing here is a total number of statements. So you get a sense of what's happening over time. And then this graph even more so sits there and expresses how much learning is happening because of how many XAPI statements is going into the system. We actually find that learning record stores are really good for picking trends in what's happening and understanding trends in data rather than actually sort of specifically drilling into has someone completed or not completed this. Sort of trends for the whole cohorts of people, or sometimes there's trends to sit there and go, actually, if you are drilling into a person, this particular person might be struggling in this particular area, or they haven't done this much work over this particular period of time. So it's actually really good. That's what I actually think it's really good for. Is actually looking at trends or at the real close detail. But if you actually just wanting to report on completions, then in some ways a learning management system is more than adequate. Now, Zoe has a new team member, and in actual fact, this is an induction program is organized as a journey, and it's sort of customized to each part of the organization. So this journey and campaign is sort of built around workplace learning experiences rather than just being 100% online. So she can actually also just get a really good sense of where people are in this journey based on the dashboard that you can see in Total Learn and how that's combined with the dashboard from Learning Locker as well. So she's being able to see right and wrong answers at a detailed level. So essentially the data is coming back in from the learning record store, but then also that's embedded back into a spot that's in the LMS that's giving her just a really sort of definite and a simplified view around course completions as well. So back to one of the other characters, Sarah. So Sarah is actually in a spot where she's one of the organizational priorities is improving customer service. And essentially, she's trying to do this by becoming a whole lot more data-driven and really working with data to be able to think this through. So what she's been able to do is get the data that's coming in from customers' net promoter scores, the feedback that's actually happening, and she's putting these into XAPI statements. It's being fed into the learning record store, and then she's able to do a correlation graph in the learning record store to be able to sit there and go, okay, who's doing the most, or which part, who is, or which part of the organization is doing the most learning around the customer service experiences we put together, how their NPS score is going. So essentially being able to see the relationship between those two things in a really nice way. And this does involve some technical work in terms of getting the data in from the customer feedback system into the learning record store. It does just involve some careful planning also about then actually how that data is going to be formatted and collected and organized around the learning experiences around customer service as well. So it does involve a different sort of planning. So in the podcast series I did on XAPI, it meant that you really, if you do want to go down this track of being more data driven, you actually have to think through from day one actually what data you're collecting, how you're bringing it in, and it's not an afterthought is basically what I'm saying. It actually becomes a core part of what you're doing. Now, in the last place Sarah worked at, her social network was a platform, was a ghost town. And this is really common in experience, but in this particular scenario in Wattle Hill, it's a really different type of spot. It's actually the place where they work. So instead of it being an extra thing, it's actually in the spot where everyone sort of congregates to do work, collaborate, and share what they're working on. And sharing just becomes part of what's actually happening on a day-to-day basis. It's not an added extra on top of things. So this approach is partly sometimes called a digital workplace approach, where essentially what's actually happening is that the digital platforms, the collaboration platforms, and they're embedded into actually how people work. So things like wikis can be really powerful tools for just doing simple things like having meeting agendas and notes and tasks, all written up into a shared spot, which both or the whole organization can see as well as the team as well. So it becomes a sort of, rather than being a sort of added extra, it's actually a core part of actually how people work. She's in a spot where essentially the team's actually across different locations. So essentially the day starts with status upgrade dates about what people are planning on doing. And then a really simple question at the end of the day is asked as well. It's about what people have learned. So in actual fact, people are being asked to reflect on what they're learning and reflect on work as part of what they're doing. So essentially, this notion of learning in the flow of work. Not always just about accessing information in the flow of work, but by getting people to articulate and reflect on what they're learning, it raises it to the surface in a very different way. The platform is basically in the background of what people are doing. It's interesting because essentially when a platform and a social platform gets used in this way, the mixing between work, sharing, and learning all becomes sort of very natural. Not everyone works in an office-based space. So Zoe's in a spot where she's managing a team of people that are out in the community. So essentially, the nice thing about sometimes these types of platforms like Tatara Social is they work really well on mobiles as well. And people can just sit there and do a thing where they can actually have a question and answer style format. What's also interesting with this spot where people might be a bit more mobile, they might be less likely to actually use the social learning platform in a way to be sharing what they're doing, but they might be using it for searching. So that then means that the information needs some sort of curation and leadership. So in actual fact, quite often it's actually a team is someone in the team is writing up the questions. So one of the powerful strategies that can be used with that sort of approach of one of the powerful strategies that can be really used in this sort of approach of different people sort of sharing the process of articulating work, answering questions, writing up questions, is where people take turns in blogging on a social platform like Tatara Social, and then writing up trends that they're seeing, and generally being the person in the team that's working out loud. So it doesn't actually have to be everyone who's actually participating in the platform, but essentially might be a thing where different people's roles and different people who are taking a leadership role in the platform is rotated around over each month or each quarter. So Michael, the digital learning lead, he's the person who's responsible for content curation. So he's actually keeping an eye out for what's happening on Tatara Social, seeing what people are sharing. And then if they look really useful, he actually, to more people, he puts them into Glasshouse as a collection and tags them so everyone can browse and search them in the learning portal. So he's in the background, sort of in the spot, just sort of watching what's happening on the social learning platform to see what sort of has possibilities coming up for content curation. Here's just a quick grab of what a collection of resources in Glasshouse might look like. So it actually has a feature where you can put in questions and answers or links to be able to tag them and then show different pages and different views of those based on those tags. Now, one of the exciting programs that Michael's working on is a collaboration across different councils looking at emerging tech and their effect on local government, things like self-drive cars and what that sort of means. So it's actually in a spot where it's not just one council doing this as well, because essentially it's a good example of where collaboration across different organisations can build a different set of understanding. For this particular project, they've actually taken quite a social learning approach that's structured. Because it's structured, they've actually put it more back into the Tatara Learn rather than Tatara Social. So essentially using some of the sort of more social features that exist in Tatara Learn. The learning model is actually about, in the 10, the notion of webinars with guest speakers coming in, using a webinar platform like Zoom or GoToMeeting. Great thing about something like the Tatara Learn being open and flexible is there's a whole lot of plugins that can be brought in to support those types of platforms. Then there's a fortnightly discussion about a scenario from the future. There is essentially online role plays that are built in the forums. Then as people are starting to work through those scenarios, they're using the wikis to build a book of knowledge and collaborative notes about what this does really mean for their work. It's really interesting because quite often people think about learning platforms and learning management systems as scorn players. Here's a module, go off and do this. A platform like Tatara Learn, which comes from the education background of Moodle, has a really different set of tools to be able to build these types of blended and online blends in a very different way. Now, a couple of success factors for this. It's highly facilitated. It's not, those discussions are led by a facilitator, just like they would be in a face-to-face session. And people actually had to apply for them to be part of the program as well. So they feel privileged to be part of it. So they value it. So they will actually participate in it. Now, back to Sarah, the learning lead. The last place she was worked in, the LMS was a nightmare. And it really needed to make a few different changes. Just really small things, but the vendor was so big and they were so small compared to all the other organizations that they were in a spot where they just couldn't affect any change with it. Whereas something like Tatara Learn means that you can sort of bring in different plugins. Partners can make customizations to it and build it and add new features to it or remove features sometimes to make it simpler, which then means that you can really make the learning management system your own and build it and make it the way you need it to be in your particular organization. Organizations exist because people actually need different things and to service different needs, and our tools quite often need to be customized for different needs as well. There's always this rolling out a new job management system, and learning is really integrated into this in a really different way, using some of the tools which allow content to be embedded from Glasshouse into different ways. There's a really nice learning way working podcast with Melanie from Becca. They've got their own project management platform and they've integrated essentially learning back into the project management platform by actually just having buttons at particular spots that open up windows into a spot where it sort of has the classic sort of how-to in the piece of software, then examples of actually how people do things, and then also videos of, say, best practice as well. Back to Michael. His learning problem is they have a series of casual employees that work in the pool and the aquatic centre that really have not high turnover of them. But not really enough to really justify putting the training online. But they needed to be in a spot where they needed to really streamline what they were doing. So what they did was actually focus on assessment checklists to make it clear about what people needed to do. So to give them pathways, that's the thing I talked about, it being in the middle of the ecosystem to actually be in a spot where they were being measured on what they needed to do. Now, this is quite a common sort of format of being able to do assessments in terms of on-the-job reviews and assessment checklists, but quite often it's very paper-driven and very complicated. What we've done in Glasshouse is be able to build essentially a form builder that allows people to be able to build checklists or other types of forms, which then go into a learning record store, and then be able to send completion data back um, to Tara or in other particular LMSs that support the learning technologies interoperability standard. These can be both mobile and desktops, and we're in a spot where sometimes we've actually been able to sort of build customized assessment apps for people to be able to really easily find a checklist, do an observation on someone in the workplace, and that just seamlessly flowing back into the learning management system. Michael's needing to revise some online learning modules. The subject matter experts need to review what's actually happened with that. Now, one of the interesting things about cloud-based authoring systems like Glasshouse is they've become really easy to be able to get feedback from people. So essentially, they become very easy to make changes. You just go to a site, log in, make the change. You can either publish it or put it into draft, and very sort of rapid in the way it works. Then you can actually allow people to be able to make comments directly in line as well, so that the feedback process becomes a whole lot quicker. Quicker because essentially it's easier for people to make comments. It's easier for you to find where those comments are as well. Then once the changes have been made, and that's partly what I hinted at with a rapid ability, is that you can just press publish, and then all of a sudden if it's hooked up in a live format using that learning technologies interoperability standard, it then means that it will go live instantly, and it's ready for everyone. So it just becomes a lot easier to be able to cope with change, which then leads to better ability to be able to be more agile. Cloud-based authoring systems, just to sort of talk a little bit about why they're really important. It means all your files are in an essential place. From an L&D person's point of view, you can see what everyone's working on, especially if you're allowing different parts of the business to actually do different types of content authoring. It just actually means it's easier to coordinate that. And then there's also less time wasted in different people theming things and having to worry about branding so much, because it's all within a consistent look and feel. Thank you for listening to this and watching this webinar recording. If you want to have a closer look at any of the platforms or talk about any of the types of strategies I've talked about in this particular webinar, just reply to one of the email messages you probably got from me if you're listening to this recording, and start a conversation. Thank you again.